Damn, son, where'd you find this? It's King Majora. Fuck with your boy. Let's get to it. What's up, people? It's King Majora here. Look, so today I want to talk about a touchy issue, but I want to speak about it in a completely honest and non-threatening manner to all said parties. The issue of race, correct? It is a touchy subject, and the sad reality is that we have been brainwashed as people, and I've gone extensively into the social engineering that determines what we even consider to be correct, our epistemology, and what goes into the very textbooks that we consume as students when we were children, namely through the philanthropy of Rockefeller, Carnegie, Ford, those types, okay? You need to understand that basically when you connect the dots on the industry of the nature of those powers that be in particular, and namely the institutions and power players that got basically their start as the philanthropy, wealth, plutocracy elites from those such as the Rockefeller or the Rothschild family dynamics in the bankings of England and other areas, right? You know, you're basically looking at a cabal that has within a sect in the Jewish aspect. I'm someone who has defended and accused Jews of various walks of life while understanding the nuance that they're not all just boogeymen. There is an issue with using the Jewish concepts in a ethnically and culturally suicidal method to gain power for a certain handful of families that intermingle within aristocracy and bloodline royalties. They are Europhile and Judean-based, Christian mystic-oriented, these types of the secret orders that follow the old traditions of the older religions that, for example, the religions that basically spawn in the Bible, such as the Canaanite pantheon. Basically, to make a long story short, these people have engineered efforts to brainwash people about race, and I think that we need to be more honest about it. And the critics of the theories of race realism, when you understand the methodology, it's not actually as debunked as they'd like to claim. You go into the peoples who are the prominent moneyed interests in academia who got famous by doing the intellectual market. These people, ironically, happen to be of this Jewish radical nature. It does go into the sect of Jews who just so happen to be Talmudic, rabbinical. That's just a fact. Not all Jews do that, and not all Jews take the Talmud seriously. They do tend to think in that sort of monolith a lot for survival reasons. That goes into what I'm explaining in this video. The suicidal ethnic nature of the elites of the Jews. They're no different than our white elites. They betray their own as well. They don't care. They're about themselves, ladies and gentlemen, and that's actually contrary to what the contrary of the popular belief. They have every right to be, because you could be right now, especially if you're in the United States. The internet age is an opportunity. But as I was saying, the race realism argument needs to be presented. So I'm going to play a video of a content creator speaking about race realism, and I want you to just consider what he says about the methodologies of debunking and so forth. So let's get into it.
Race realism is the position that race is a biological reality, not a social construct. The foundation of race realism is not ideology nor even science, but direct observation. Long before they acquire language, children perceive racial differences without being instructed to do so. As they mature, children begin to associate these physical differences with behavioral patterns. We observe racial differences prior to language, prior to politics, prior to ideology, and prior to science. Science does not generate but confirms what observation already tells us. Disciplines like genetics, cranial morphometry, endocrinology, and psychometrics confirm that our intuitive distinctions track biologically meaningful patterns. Race realism, therefore, is not a hypothesis awaiting proof, but an empirical generalization resisting disproof. The social construct thesis, by contrast, fails the test of empirical adequacy as it denies that which is directly observed and statistically consistent. A social construct is a collectively maintained category or thing that is made real by convention or collective agreement. Examples include money, a symbolic medium of exchange that holds value only because institutions enforce and individuals accept its worth, and traffic rules, which are arbitrary coordination systems, like driving on the right or the left side of the road. Race is not like these. Race is a biological reality that arose from evolutionary pressures long before human societies, languages, or institutional conventions existed. In fact, rather than race being a social construct, it is far more accurate to say that society is a product of race. To say race is a social construct is to invert cause and effect, like saying clay is a sculpture. Races are different because they evolved by divergent evolutionary paths. These involved lengthy geographic isolation, different environmental selection pressures, and differential social and sexual selection. We observe racial differences across several domains, including morphological differences in cranial shape and volume, skin pigmentation, facial features, and hair texture and density, cognitive differences in general intelligence, working memory, neural connectivity patterns, time preference, and moral intuitions, and behavioral differences in aggression and impulsivity, conscientiousness, parental investment and nurturing, truthfulness, inventiveness, and cooperation. Many people assume interracial differences are due primarily to differences in culture, but culture is not so much the origin of difference as an outcome. Specifically, culture reflects 1. The policies of a society's elites, and 2. The underlying biological traits of the population. In this sense, culture is an extended phenotype. So let's clarify the causal sequence. First, ecological selection pressures shaped population-specific gene pools. Genes influence developmental trajectory, including the structure of the brain. Neural architecture shapes cognition and cognition and temperament shape behavior. Therefore, thought and behavior are largely constrained by biology. Of course, culture does exert a recursive influence, but all traits are influenced by genetics. Let's address 4 main objections. A common objection to race realism is that racial categories cannot be biologically real because they vary across cultures and historical periods. This reasoning assumes that for categories to be meaningful, they must be fixed, universal, and perfectly delineated. But this is a category error. Taxonomies are tools for tracking regularities, not Platonic ideals. For example, a person with a white mother and a black father is biologically 50% of each ancestry. Whether such a person is socially categorized as black, as in the United States, or mixed, as in Brazil, is culturally variable, but it does not alter the underlying biological facts. Another objection claims that because human traits vary along a continuum, racial categories lack biological validity. This reflects a misunderstanding of how biological classification operates. Continuous variation is the norm, not the exception, in evolutionary biology. Red and orange gradually blend into one another, yet both are distinct and meaningful categories. Likewise, the existence of racially mixed individuals does not disprove the existence of races any more than the color green disproves the existence of the colors blue and yellow. Yet another objection to race realism is that racial classification can be utilized to justify oppression of certain groups. However, this objection has nothing to do with the empirical validity of race and racial differences. Many true and useful distinctions, like sex, age, health, or income, can likewise be abused, but misuse does not invalidate biological or epistemological validity. A final objection holds that contemporary science has refuted the concept of race. Critics often demand either A, a single essential trait that all members of a race possess and others lack, or B, a single causal mechanism responsible for all intergroup differences. But taxonomy does not depend on essences, singular defining traits, or unitary causes. This is because evolution does not proceed by perfectly discrete jumps, producing sharp edges, but rather by shaping populations within adaptive fitness landscapes, often forming identifiable local optima, or islands of evolutionary stability, which are revealed by observable clusters of traits. Population genetics routinely identifies distinct ancestral clusters, and forensic scientists can determine race from skeletal remains, oral bacteria, or a strand of hair. Artificial intelligence is now capable of identifying people's race from chest x-rays, spine radiographs, and even mammograms. Race is an important factor in determining if donors of organs and bone marrow are potential matches for patients. According to leukemia charity Gift of Life, quote, ethnicity is the key to a perfect match between donor and recipient. So there is no problem of scientific evidence for race, but rather a problem with scientists and other intellectuals being too afraid to speak the truth. More importantly, though, race realism does not depend on science for its validity. People observed racial differences long before the emergence of biology or genetics. Any society premised on the denial of race will collapse from accumulated error, just as any bridge built on false measurements will collapse from accumulated strain.
And that was Race Realism by Exquafante, the YouTuber. Be sure to watch their content. They're phenomenal. You probably may have even seen that if you're watching this video. But what I would like to go further on is that basically the different races are real, ladies and gentlemen. And I think it's obvious if you study the previous hominids. The controversial nature behind the labeling of Neanderthal genetics in the modern Homo sapiens sapiens, where it was most likely and prominent was within the Levant region, where the Jews would have actually been. That would have been likely. Within the white DNA, there is DNA structure that is within a element within common ancestry, but basically there's not real intermingling. That is seen within Jewish diaspora, Arabian diaspora, the Levantian region diaspora, because that's where it was known to have occurred legitimately. But Jewish people, I can't think of the name now, unfortunately. I will update this video if I can recall it offhand. But, basically, these types basically said that white people have the Neanderthal DNA, and I don't go into hating the Jews because that's what these particular types want you to do. They want you radicalized against the Jews to learn about them so that they can have their fulfillment of humanitization of the eschaton and hasten the end times. They want the world to unite against Israel, and basically their hopes is to prevail against them, probably with Talpiot, the cybersecurity, all top cyber corporations are headquartered within Israel, talking about Intel backdoor chips. And I can play that video actually another time, but this video is about race realism. I think that we have to be honest about the IQ levels and how the productions of race, the culture of the blacks, for example. And I don't hate you, but your culture, hip-hop, for example, gangsta, was a product of the CIA. There's ties between the niggas with attitude and, the CIA. The mere fact that, they were sponsored by the same guy that did Pink Floyd. The very nature of the music industry to promote basically, if you fail, you basically become a dope running operation for mafia to pay for every expense that you have under the label. If you're under, and that's been people that's talked about that, the engineering of your culture to degrade you, and you accept it and then tell Whitey he has no position to have a say, or you get mad over the N-word. These are base instincts of like the Australopithecus and the other types of, hominid life forms. And I'm not afraid to say it, and I don't even hate them. There are phenomenal black people, everyday black people. But they are also plagued by their own. It's not to be actually racist, but to actually make the analogy with no puns. The gorilla in the cage that's abused. And I don't mean that to be an asshole. I'm saying it's the perfect analogy. You won't leave. You would rather say Whitey, Ronnie, or King Majora, you're a white dude. You can't say nigger. And I don't mean it to be hateful. You have the capability to truly augment your species. But let's be perfectly honest. There is quite a lacking when you're left alone. But the greater among you even exile themselves from you, because think about it. Your own brothers are telling each other that kill your own, basically, and get mad over the fact that one leaves the hood. You don't gotta be so aggressive. Now, I get it. You're over the slavery issue. Now, you were freed, right? Now, that's still a fresh issue, and that's okay. I think in due time, your hatred will leave. In fact, it was leaving in the early 2000s, but Obama shook things up. He was hoping change, and I'm not saying that because I'm a right wing, because Trump was hoping change 2.0 for the right wing. Everybody's duped, and they finally were getting it over Bush's corruption, and then things got really bad, and then with Trump, the conspiracy theorists all got into left and right paradigm again. We can't be honest about, excuse me, and I'm tangenting for a specific purpose. You have the context with all of these things that may seem unrelated, but they are what are engineered to make things even what is considered acceptable to talk about. You have within that community brilliant minds, but the hatred for Whitey is sad because blacks in Africa are learning several languages, learning official Islam, while over here they're claiming it's actual Egypt, the Moors, this and that, and stealing everyone's culture and having a sense of robbed identity because they had American slavery, which was a lot better than African or Arab slavery by far. In fact, let's play what should be honestly said is the Europhile and Jewish-based slavery elite. Let's play a little bit of video from Johnny Gatt and other related sources.
I used to travel with suitcases full of books. Hell, I was a minister of information. So I came with 20, 30 books, and we was just kind of going over some of the information in the books. I think I had Henry Ford's book, The International Jew, The Octopus. So if you're talking about world wars, then who was responsible? If you're talking about the Civil War and you're talking about black people being brought over from Africa to America in the hulls of ships, who owned the insurance companies? Who owned the ships? And that's the kind of discussion we were having.
Okay.
Because the information that I gave in the interview wasn't from Griff. It was from Jewish scholars. I didn't write it. So it's like, wow, okay.
And who were the owners of these slave ships? Who were the biggest slavers in the 16th century? The Ashkenazi were the biggest slavers in the 16th and 17th century, going into the 18th century. You see, Ashkenazi slaving was huge. This is from, I have to be careful when I say this, so my sources, it's always best to go with Jewish sources, right? Because you just trod on a bunch of toes. So we'll go with the Jewish sources. There's a ton of sources out there, but I'll stick with the Jewish ones because that's just safer. The Jewish scholar Jonathan Shorshak says this: Jewish merchants routinely possessed enormous numbers of slaves temporarily before selling them off. If a slave auction fell on a Jewish festival, it was postponed due to lack of buyers and sellers. The Jews of Suriname gave their slave plantations Hebrew names such as Machanaim, Nachamu, and Goshen. Rabbi Herbert Bloom adds that the slave trade was one of the most important Jewish activities. Jewish slaving is in fact confirmed by the Jewish Encyclopedia.
From the Jewish Encyclopedia, quote, "The cotton plantations in many parts of the South were wholly in the hands of the Jews, and as a consequence, slavery found its advocates among them.
So, in the days that we live, there's nothing more important than this Melchizedek message. It is the solution to the Palestinian problem. It is the solution to the Black Lives Matter that is being fomented by the synagogue of Satan. It is the solution to racial tensions, segregation that is all part of the synagogue of Satan's plot. But that is what they want, so that we keep our minds off of them as the true slavers.
Jews had in fact been involved not only in the African slave trade, but they had been involved in a variety of other slave trades too for a very long period of time. Apparently they had actually dominated slavery and the slave trade in medieval times. On the plane on the way here a couple of days ago, I was rereading a dissertation, a PhD dissertation from 1977 by a man called Harold D. Brackman, who is a functionary of the Simon Wiesenthal Center of all places. And he did a PhD dissertation detailing black-Jewish relations from ancient times up to 1900. And he actually mentions in his dissertation, he acknowledges the fact that Jews were the principal slave traders in the world for several hundred years, although in typical fashion he puts a very interesting spin on it. He acknowledges, as I guess he has to, the Jews were the major slave traders in the world, trading slaves everywhere from Russia to Western Europe, to India, to China. But he says that they dominated the world trade only for a few hundred years, only. He says they were the main slave traders from the 8th century to the 12th century, but that was no big thing. It was only a few hundred years.
And this will be like showing a vampire the cross or throwing holy water on a vampire. See, because the worst thing that a deceiver wants is for the people deceived to find the truth. Black folk picking cotton. Listen good now. Cotton was then what oil is now. The largest producer of oil in the world are the rich ones, and the strategic interests of America means in order for them to rule, they have to link with where the oil is coming from and take it or maneuver to get it, but they must have oil. In the time of slavery, it was cotton. And it's interesting that the cotton would come down the Mississippi, New Orleans to the Gulf, from Biloxi, Mississippi, and from Mobile, Alabama. And the cotton would come down and go up to New York, where the brethren of the Jewish people in the South, in the North, were the masters of the needle trades. And they had their brothers also in the South taking the lint from the cotton and producing cloth through weaving. But these were Jewish people owning the land. They were the majority. They were the merchants. They were the traders. They knew how to hook up with their brethren in the North, and they would send raw cotton to the mills in England, in Manchester, Leeds, and Bristol, and the British would turn it into cloth and then sell it all over the world. The Rothschilds became rich from cotton. The Lehman Brothers became rich from cotton in Alabama, then moved to New York and Wall Street. I know the truth, and somebody gotta tell it or die trying.
So, let's be real here. There are serious issues with how things are said. I am a fan of black culture from what blacks organically produce on their own. I feel pity for you because basically you are put in a position where you are constantly marketed to and told that everything's racist whitey, and you are just a market to be appealed to for political block power, and your potential is so much more. But then again, at the end of the day, I do think by the racial limit, there is a stagnation that's not unique to you. There really is a correlation between these other populations, the Latino, the Arabs, the South Asians, but they seem to not be able to truly function on the level of Europeans and some of the Asians, and it's just a matter of fact. And because that's a fact that is like a Silent Hill mind-shattering thing to these people, the fact that they can't emulate the particular societies of white people because race is real, ladies and gentlemen. Blacks could create their own function because what functions for them works for them. And the same for any other race. We need to be intellectually honest. And a lot of the hatred is Hollywood propaganda, ladies and gentlemen. Don't hate black, don't hate Jew, don't hate whitey in the sense of the complete monolith, ladies and gentlemen, because people are people. But we need to have the real conversation and point fingers at certain peoples, not as collectives, but institutions, families, and motives that go within these sort of ways that affect, society at large in everyday life, ladies and gentlemen, because we could be a lot better than we are. We were getting better with race relations in the early 2000s, the internet age and the meme culture that was spawning from Frutiger Arrow. It was a lot better of a future we were promised. Obama started the wedge with left, and Trump finished the wedge with the right. I have no doubt the next one's going to come for the other niches like conspiracies and others and religious. It's coming. Are you ready for it? I hope you are, ladies and gentlemen. So I hope I've let you think about things. And as an ending note, where do I think the other races stand? Asians like the Chinese, the Japanese, etc., they claim to be descendant of lizard people. You've got Eric Davis, who was a scientist for the armed forces and is a